Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. So, we're going to talk about math and racism. It's going to get heavy, so if you're not ready for that, then please feel free to leave. If you're ready for it, let's get into it. It's personally hard for me to do, um, but we're going to talk about math and racism. I'm going to talk about like how math has been used as far as racism is concerned, and we're going to talk about that in several different ways. We're going to talk about the one drop rule, blood quantum, three-fifths compromise, and some more things. We're also going to talk about representation. So the idea is to have a nuanced take on these things and to get you started about thinking and how like math is used and how context is absolutely key. So I want to talk about these things and like I said, in some more things along the way that could easily splinter off into their own videos. It's going to be a heavy because race is a heavy topic, racism is a heavy topic, and I'm a black man in America. It's a heavy topic for me. Um, so again, heavy topic. Let's get into it. So math is everywhere in everything, and it is not inherently good or evil. However, it can be used for good purposes or evil purposes. It can be used in political fashions. So my whole thing is math is often revered because it's treated as this thing that is infallible, but time and time again, how we use it is not right. And to start with how like math has been used in a as far as racism is concerned, like I wanted to talk about the one drop rule, and then I will lead that. Sorry, that will lead into other topics, and I'm coming at it from these perspectives because I'm an American, and our history is steeped in racism. And no, that is not up for debate. Just it isn't. Um, so with that in mind, let's get started with that. So with the one drop rule, if you're not familiar with it, it's the idea that if you have a fraction of black ancestry, then you are considered black. This was a thing that was, used in a legal context that is no longer used in that legal context, but weirdly enough, still in a social one. And I think this is best evidenced by President Obama, who was in fact mixed race, right? He was black and he was white. He was mixed, but he's considered the first black president. He's considered black because of how we treat this. And the thing with this one drop rule is it was used to subjugate. It was used to deny benefits to my people. And there's a whole long history with it. The idea is here we're seeing math being used in this way, right? Where you see it used in a socio-political way and to have disastrous results. And it's wild because again, like even though it's no longer legal to have the one drop rule, it's still very much used in a social context, and it's horrifying. Because again, math is not evil, but how it's used, that's a different story. And on the flip side, you have the blood quantum. And whereas with the one drop rule, it was enough to say you can have any fraction of black ancestry in your heritage to be declared black. That could be like one half, one fourth, one eighth, 1/16, etc. It was enough to say, hey, you could have a quote unquote drop of black blood to be considered black, right? Where you had that on for black people. When it comes to Native Americans, you have the blood quantum, which it goes in the opposite direction, but the results are still the same, where people get subjugated and certain, things are denied, right? So let's get into it. With the blood quantum, it's the idea that you have to have a certain fraction of Native American blood in you to be considered Native American. And it varies tribe to tribe, but the idea is like in some tribes maybe it's one half, and some other ones maybe one fourth or one eighth or 1/16, whatever the case may be. Um, and so the idea there is if you're not Native American enough, you might not legally speaking be privy to certain benefits or protections, and that affects Native Americans heavily, even still till this day. Now, it's worth noting that the tribes may have their own standards for entering a tribe, but blood quantum, that's, well, a legal thing in the way that I was talking about it. And it's crazy that that's the case. But here again, you have math being used in a diabolical way. It's worth noting because, like, when it comes to the one drop rule, when it comes to blood quantum, these are things that aren't like in a distant past, right? And then, before either of those things were a thing, you had the idea of the Three-Fifths Compromise. So not long after America became its own thing, it's not like we got rid of racism or slavery when we became our own nation. And one of the things that happened, like I think 1787 was the Three-Fifths Compromise, and the idea is it's such a ridiculous, awful thing. But the idea was that enslaved black people were considered three-fifths of a person, with the idea being that this affected the taxes of each state as well as how many members they could have in the House of Representatives and also how many votes they had for the Electoral College, which the Electoral College could be its own video, to be honest. And I want to do something with math and voting down the line, so we'll get into that. Um, but yeah, so that's the basics of Three-Fifths Compromise. There's a lot of history behind it, but the idea was like it was a political tool, right? And they used us as political tools, not for the last time either. But it's hard for me to talk about all this stuff because it's crazy, right? Like it's not that far in the past, and I think it's worth noting if you're not familiar with things. Was like race itself is a social construct, right? There's always been different ethnic groups or different cultures. There's always been discrimination, but like with race, the term itself came into play in the 1500s, and then being used to discriminate, at least in the context that we're used to, that's more of a 1600s thing. And what was interesting to me about that is that, so if you haven't heard of Bacon's Rebellion, that's something worth noting because back then you had people who were black and enslaved, but also people who were white and enslaved, or also some indentured servants. And the idea was there was a point where you had these groups along with free black people fighting back in back in 1676 to 1677, and they were rebelling. They had this uprising, and one of the side effects of this uprising was using race to divide poorer white people and indentured service enslaved people from free black people and free enslaved enslaved black people. So there was it was a superficial way to divide people out more. And it really got crazier and crazier over time. And with America, we got really good with the racism there, and a lot of people took suit, and it spread and it spread. And here's the thing. So I mentioned three policies that were both legal in nature, that had nothing to them, like legitimately nothing to them, that were used in these horrible ways. And you have mapping used in these ways, but that's not the only way, right? Because one of the things when it comes to like race and it comes to this country and it comes to subjugation, you see money often being used, and there's math in money, there's math in how it's used and how it plays out, and it can be used to disastrous effects. And then there's this idea that we might not have the one drop rule, like I said earlier, in a legal sense anymore, but it's still used in a social sense. And then not only that, you have all these different stats about black people, and like some of them are incredibly inaccurate. Some of them, they were recorded, and it's like, well, you gotta question context. Like whenever you deal with data, you gotta question context. You gotta ask who is recording this data. And were the was it accurately recorded? What does it really mean? Because sometimes you'll have things like be recorded, but it's like, but okay, you can't do anything with that. You're just saying things at a certain point. So I mean, you got to consider that because like sometimes we revere math, we revere numbers, we revere data, and it's like well things aren't actually being said or data gets manipulated, and so we got to consider all these things. And then that's not all, right? Because to this day we're still seeing a lot, right? Gerrymandering remains a thing, and there's a lot of math in gerrymandering, how that works, how it functions, and how it affects voting. And that can honestly be its own video, and I intend for it to be. But you also get things like redlining, where it's like that was legally a thing, and math was used to deny black people funds, and it affected housing among other things. And while it's not legally a thing anymore, let's not act like the effects still aren't there. Let's not act like it still doesn't happen in some form or another. And so you see math being used in some pretty diabolical ways. And when it comes to voting, that's a thing too, right? Because right now, we have certain qualifications for voting, and some of them are citizenship, and some of them are age based. For the record, there's math and all that too, and I want to do a video on citizenship down the line. I was inspired by a friend who realized they could be a dual citizen in another country. In addition to U.S., I'm sorry, there was a better way to say that. They realized that they can not only be a citizen of the U.S. but another country because of their heritage, and there's math in that. But yeah, so there's math in voting, there's math in citizenship, there's math in redlining, gerrymandering, and like all these things. Uh, you know, Race is involved, and it's interesting. And this video is draining, so I don't want to go on forever. But one of the big things that I also want to bring up is representation, because there's this idea that I've seen where it's like a lot of people have an idea of who can be doing math out there. And it's like, there's a racial component to that. And it's just like it's flawed, right? Because there's some people who think, oh, well, it's a white person thing or it's an Asian thing. And it's just like, Jesus, no, it's not how math works. One, math isn't everyone's thing, right? It's not limited to race or sex or gender. It's not linked to any of that, right? We are all natural mathematicians, and what we do in the classroom is an extension of that, right? It's making sense of the world, making sense of the universe, and what we do. It's saying something about the past, the present, the future. And so we're all trying our best to talk about what's going on, and we're also trying to like problem solve. And when it comes to math and academic sense, that's what it's about. And that doesn't belong to just a specific group. It belongs to everyone. Everyone has that right to learn more about the world and how it functions. And considering that we're in this very like STEM driven world, this very data driven world, math can be used to do and say diabolical things. And to act like race isn't a factor in that is ridiculous. And if you like go into the math world in the academic sense, a lot of race involved and racism involved in like research and how students are treated or how faculty members are treated. It is wild, and some people will deny that there's a problem, but screw them and screw that, there is. And not only that, it's like okay, so like I'm a black man in STEM, I'm black and in math. Like you don't see a lot of us in that academic sense, in that professional sense, and it's like it's alarming. And there's a lot that comes with that, and a lot that comes with representation. And let me tell you something. I've had some students before that never had a math teacher that looked like me, and some of them were, like me, like right, they looked like me, and they had never had a teacher like that. And I've had some students point out how much that matters. And so my thing is, I want more people to see that race does not depict whether you are a mathematician, because you are already one, and it should not restrict you from becoming a mathematician if you should so choose. And that we should be careful of the data that we consume, who's conducting this and who's conducting that, and how we set data. Because math may not be good, or people can be. And I'm sorry, I noticed some freezing, so I'll kind of reiterate. Math is not good or evil, but people can be. They can use math for good purposes, but they can use it for nefarious purposes as well. And I guess I want to kind of close things off by saying, like, this video was pretty like hard for me. And if you've never seen one of my videos, I'm usually smiling and laughing and, making jokes. I haven't really been able to do that for this video, but I do feel like it's important to make because math affects everything, whether we see it or not. And so it's worth considering where the math shows up and who's using it. Because, see, math can be used as a way to power people, but right now I see it being used to, cause fear, or, there's an intentional misuse of it, and people are kind of betting on people like not understanding it or not getting it. They're dependent on people fearing it in order to manipulate them. So I want people to not only see the beauty in math and the wonder in math, but to see that you should be asking questions. Whoever is giving you this fact or that fact, or so-called facts, or they're throwing this number at you, that number, they're giving you this data, that data, you should be questioning everything. I want people to not get got. There's a lot of math in racism, and that doesn't get talked about enough. A lot of racism in math too. I want to eliminate that. I want to see that change. And while I'm winding down, I want to tell you something. One time in college, I said, I had someone, like, there's a lot of things that, don't get said, but, implications are there. So, but I had someone directly say to my face that they were surprised that I was a math major. And I'm like, what? Why? And they said, well, because it's not a black major. And it's like, what does that actually mean? Right? That's not a thing. Like, you can't say that math isn't black. Math doesn't have a race. You're not more likely to become a mathematician because of this race or that race. There may be restrictions because people are people, but inherently it's not a racial thing. We just put race in it because we put race in everything. I am black. I was a math major. I was a math teacher for several years. I am always a mathematician, and I'm doing this work and coming to you. And here's the thing. Don't consider me a rarity. I broke through because this is what I pursued. There's nothing stopping other black people from pursuing this route. There shouldn't be. I don't know, this video is hard. It was hard. So I'm going to close out saying, look, math can be a wonderful thing, but it's all in how you use it, and it exists whether we talk about it or not, and I feel like we need to be cognizant of it. And just, don't be racist. Don't bring math into racism. Don't bring racism into math. Just don't be racist. It's not that hard. Like, and I don't care if people like say, oh, well, they grew up in this way and that way. Like, we all make choices. We have our nature. We have our nurture. We have necessity, but we also have choice. We can make decisions to not only not be racist, but we can actively be anti-racist. That is a thing. We can take steps towards ending this nonsense because it wasn't always like this. Don't get me wrong, discrimination is always a thing, and when we end racism, people will try to find another way to discriminate. But we can try our best to get rid of this. We can try our best to fight for a brighter future, a better tomorrow. This world does not have to be what it is. I'll see you in the next video. Professor Prime out.